Welcome. You have arrived at iLearn's Basic Research and Theory Panel Session 1, Transforming Education with Immersive Learning, Bridging the Skills Gap and Removing Accessibility Barriers. It is my honor to welcome to the stage this panel this morning from our partners at AIXR. I'm going to hand it over to Sam.
Hello, everyone. Great to see you here, and it's an honor to be here at the Immersive Learning Research Network's 7th International Conference. As Heather mentioned, this panel and the subsequent panel is sponsored by the Academy of International Extended Reality. And today, this first one, we're going to be looking at how do we train the trainer and looking at removing those adoption barriers for immersive labs within education. My name is Sam Watts. I'm the Immersive Partnerships Director of a company called Make Real in Brighton, UK. And today I am joined by some wonderful people, Sophie, Jonathan and Usama. I will let them quickly introduce themselves, and then we will get down to the real questions and answers and meat of the panel. So, Sophie, would you like to go first, just to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Sam. So my name is Sophie Thompson, and I am the co-founder of a company called Virtual Speech, which is an online learning platform that combines e-learning with practice and training in VR. We have 350,000 learners across 130 countries, all learning communication skills in VR. So that's skills like public speaking, sales, leadership, ethics, and job interview techniques. We work with enterprise and higher education, and we run introductory train the trainer sessions with some of our clients as well, mainly in the higher education space there, just to ensure that they fully understand how both the software and hardware run, best practices for immersive labs, and any frequently asked questions that they may be asked by learners.
Great, thank you very much. Usama, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes. Hello, I'm Usama Jma, and I am the co-founder and CEO of AIXR. AIXR is a drag and drop solution and creator kit. It is made for teachers from any age and for also students to learn with AR and then learn how to create AR in an easy way.
Excellent. And Jonathan.
Good afternoon or evening, everybody, depending where you are. My name is Jonathan Fu. I'm the CEO of View Networks in Singapore, and we do VR development, VR content for the education as well as the medical sector. I'm also a faculty at the Singapore University of Social Sciences, where I run, I'm a co-director of the XR Media Lab, where we look at developing VR and AR tools in the higher education space. Nice to meet everybody.
Excellent, thanks everyone. Right, so I think what we're going to be doing is, as I say, looking at immersive labs and then talking about train the trainer. So once we've covered these topics, if you've got questions, we're going to allow some time at the end if you want to have a Q&A session. But to start off with, what do you think are some of the common issues when running an immersive lab? Sophie, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So yeah, there are a couple of things that are common issues. I think I'll just draw on this one first, is in terms of the initial setup and fully understanding the hardware and what's needed to run the hardware, and then also the different softwares that are uploaded onto the headsets. And then what I would say is the biggest issue is knowing the difference between a software issue and a hardware issue. I mean, usually, as I'm sure the other panelists will have experienced as well, the software providers can obviously help out with hardware problems as well, but just in terms of running the immersive lab efficiently and being able to get any issues sorted quickly, it's definitely really beneficial for the leader of the immersive lab to understand those differences and the key issues that might occur in either one of them.
Excellent. Jonathan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the challenge that we face, especially in a kind of the Institute of Higher Learning, is really the understanding of what the entire spectrum of extended reality is. Everything from reality to virtual reality, and there's always a confusion of what it actually is. VR, AR, these are really popular catchphrases today, and everybody wants a piece of it. But really, when it comes down to defining what the solution is, many educators are actually still not very clear what each of the technologies are across the spectrum. So I think that's where we come in with the idea of training the trainer and really finding ways to educate them so that they can understand what each part of the solutions in this whole spectrum can actually help them in teaching and in the learning process.
Great. Nice segue there into trainer, but I'm just going to park that for the moment. Usama, you're looking at creating a system that allows people to create their own content and not necessarily rely upon the studios or the vendors so much. You must have sort of spoken to people running immersive labs in order to sort of come to the conclusion that this is a necessary tool. What was some of the feedback you got from immersive labs and how they're run?
So the thing is, I come from a background of journalism, and VR and some AR solutions actually are beginning to thrive within the journalistic world. And a lot of production companies and a lot of magazines and news outlets, besides education-wise, they are having huge issues in finding people that will help them create such content, and they want to be independent, and they want to have the freedom to create what they need to be created. So for them, it will be a huge monetary investment, and a project will have to last, let's say, at least 3 months before it's even live. And by that time, it's not a documentary anymore, and the news is irrelevant. So it started from there. And then we talked to a few people about integrating immersive technologies within education. And it's basically the same issue. So having curriculum for, let's say, K-12 students using VR or AR with the currently available solutions, it will take a lot of time and a lot of logistics wise from schools. So they will be able to have full-on curriculums that use the VR or AR medium, let's say.
Right. So it's a mix of having the content available, but being able to make your own content to reduce one of those sort of common issues. And it seems to be a combination between understanding the hardware, having the right software available, but also just sort of general knowledge around the technologies. How much do you think is, and this is back out to the whole group, I mean, obviously with immersive tech and content as it is currently, with many vendors trying to encourage adoption, I mean, how much emphasis is on the vendor, do you think, to work with those running immersive labs to support them through the process? And how much is on the immersive lab operators to understand and find out?
I think while the industry is growing, it really needs to be a combined effort. So people will have different insights based on their experiences. So obviously, as somebody in the VR training and education industry, I know about the VR stuff. Whereas people who are running an immersive lab, they're on the ground, they're with the learners themselves, they're with the they're educating them. So I think really it needs to be a combined effort. So from a VR vendor perspective, we can recommend what, say, other universities or colleges are doing, and see how that works for them. So for example, at Virtual Speech, we do off the shelf stuff, whereas other companies tend to do more of the customized things. And that really depends on each individual higher education organization, what their focus is. So if they want it for a specific course, for example, then they might want to create their own content. Whereas if they wanted to, I don't know, practice for a job interview, then they might be happy with off the shelf content.
Great. Jonathan, you're in a sort of ideal situation where you run an immersive lab, but also you create content. So you can see both sides. Who do you think is generally sort of best suited to run the immersive labs? Does it need to be techies, or does it need to be lecturers, or can it be students, or is it a blend of sort of all between?
Well, the XR Media Lab that we run in the Singapore University of Social Sciences is quite unusual because we are actually a university that focuses on the social sciences. So when it comes to our XR Technology Lab, we're actually run by social scientists and not by ICT or technology people. So what happens is we then are able to look at content from the with the human-centered direction, where we look at what are the needs first, and then we find the technology solutions. Very often what we find is that there's always a clash between the subject matter experts, who are the educators, and the vendors, who are the technology. There you have technology that's already in place, ready to go, but a lot of the subject matter experts don't really know how to apply the technology to it. So I think that's part of the reason we have to really find that middle point where we can find educators who understand the technology, and perhaps technologists who can understand also the needs. We work with a lot of, for example, one of the areas that we work in research and development is with content for the elderly. And when it comes to that, you cannot put the technology first. We have to actually really look at the client, the user, and from that perspective, then build the technology around it. So I think it's a matter of a balance, finding two hands that can clap, finding the middle point where the educators and the content owners or the content creators and the technologies can come together. So you really need a little bit of each in a lab, I think.
Right. And what do you think are some of the sort of common misconceptions or myths around immersive technologies that are sort of getting in the way of wider adoption and putting people off the idea? And that's back out to the group. Feel free to do a little dance if you want to answer first.
I think that one of the biggest barriers for adoption is still the price point at which, especially the hardware, in the initial instance is at. So say the Oculus Quest 2 is cheaper than previous headsets we've had, but that's not available in all areas, and that's still quite a notable investment that an educational organization has to put into the immersive lab in the initial instance, and then obviously there's the software after that. So I think that sometimes can be a bit of a stumbling block for people when they're looking into immersive labs.
Sure. I mean, price is always going to be a key deciding factor, I think, for any technology when being introduced into education, isn't it? Usama, do you think there's what else did you find that's sort of a common myth, or what are you looking to dispel?
Well, like Sophie said, the hardware for VR tools, it is not accessible for anyone. Like, not a lot of people, like some parts of Europe and the Americas, obviously. But like, this is why we chose to have AR, because we will not have to convince them to rethink their budget, let's say, and invest in hardware. The hardware already exists. So we just focus on software. If we can manage to make the software accessible to anyone, then it's going to help democratize the idea of immersive technologies within education. But trying to fix both things at the same time, it could take longer, but also it will cost a lot for both, I think.
I think one of the keys is as well is to really think about why somebody wants to use VR AR. So kind of not just jumping on the bandwagon and doing VR for the sake of doing VR, because if you have a need for it or an immediate use case for it, it's much easier to justify that investment and request for that budget as well.
I agree. I think what I've witnessed recently was a lot of people are starting to buy headsets, and then they imagine that buying a headset's going to get them into the world of VR, and then they go, oh, okay, I've got a headset now. What do I do with it? And they don't really realize at the end of the day, it's still the content. Headsets are basically commodities. You can buy them and you'll get cheaper as the years go by, but it's the content that's going to be crucial. And I think that there needs to be a lot more emphasis on what are the content we're looking for, the needs that are going to come, that we have to develop new content for. So, a lot of labs, a lot of universities are buying equipment without thinking of the implementation and what they're actually trying to achieve buying that equipment.
Right. But having having hardware and having some experiences is one thing. What are you seeing and how are you finding in terms of the actual device management side of things for a lab? I mean, in enterprise, or if you're running a small pilot and you've got sort of 5-10 devices, it's not so bad looking after each one individually. But we're going to be start talking about classroom sizes or school sizes, hundreds of thousands of devices. Do you think we're there yet in terms of how maybe the ICT or the immersive lab operator can manage all of these devices?
I think probably the key is to start off small and work your way up, like with everything. If you're learning something new, you don't jump straight into the deep end. You start off, find your feet a bit, learn from it, and then you can expand it to more people. So one of the things that we do encourage is to start off small and ensure that the trainer or the facilitator is comfortable with a smaller number of people, a small number of headsets even at the start, so that they can find their feet with it and then gradually expand that. So not jumping straight into, say, 50 headsets, 500 people, to actually learn with a smaller number first before they progress up.
Right. Okay. Anybody, Usama, Jonathan, have you got anything to add to that?
No, actually, it's also what I think. Like, it's better to have a pilot project, let's say, within an institution, and also to see who are like, what will be the outcome of it, because there might be some people who will not be positively impacted using this technology, and they will actually have a drawback using it. So I think it's not only about like level 1 or level 2 entry that will be using this technology, but also you have to see and change the curriculum so you can and be able to actually have this technology within your school, let's say, or university? Because the bigger problem is not with adults, the bigger problem is within the children.
I agree with Sophie and Rosama on the point that we have to labs need to start things slowly. I think we cannot charge into it with a huge budget and imagine that it's going to solve the problem. I think VR or AR is not going to be the magic bullet. It's understanding how you're going to roll it out, who's the market, what are the learning outcomes. Is it AR that they really want, or is it VR that they really want? I spend a lot of time doing demonstrations of the different type of technologies across the spectrum, and people go, "Oh, I see, that's what you mean," and they have to decide on things like the application. Are you going to come up with a product that is for individual learning, for self-directed learning, or is it going to be something for group-based, classroom-based? Is it more like a flipped classroom for the current e-learning trends? So all of these have to be considered, I think, before the institutions put a lot of money into something that they're not sure where it's going to go.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we're far enough down the line now that why is the main question that many are good at asking and hopefully answering to a certain degree. To play devil's advocate slightly, do you not think part of having an immersive lab is to allow exploration and play and to fill it full of technology for people to learn and explore with, to determine what can be done with the technology, to experiment and try new things out rather than just consuming content created elsewhere as part of a development course, for example?
Yeah, I do agree that trying different types of content to see what works for your students and for your organisation. But I think you can still do that on a smaller scale. So you can try lots of different content to see where that would fit in with different curriculums or different learning initiatives. But you can still do that on a smaller scale. Kind of like market research, really, isn't it? Where you have not quite a focus group, a bit larger than that, but you have a smaller study of it, which in turn you can figure out what works best, what people like best, where it would fit in, what the impact was, and then you can justify budget more as well once you've had those findings, those learnings from the smaller group across different content as well.
We've had very good success with some students coming into the lab and actually saying we want to do use VR for our capstone projects for them for their honors programs. And but it also depends, I think, which sectors they come from, and certain sectors tend to be a little bit more open to using the technologies. So, for example, we have a lot of students and faculty from the building management, events, and facilities management, and they come in with a pretty open mind about using the technologies, and they've actually produced some very good content. We believe in teaching both the educators as well as the students, because I think students are able to use technology and create interesting learning tools, and through the process of creation, actually learn a lot better as well.
Right. So we'll move on to train the trainer in a minute, but just to sort of wrap up, when you've been working with immersive labs, has there been any real surprising gotchas or problems you've come across that you just hadn't factored in or thought about, or were particularly unique to a particular setup or bit of hardware that you just hadn't really thought about how that was going to be used?
I don't think so from the point of view of virtual speech. I would say that when we do train the trainer, we can run, say, Zoom or WebEx sessions with them with 1 to 5 people to start with, and most of any of the questions that would come up for them come up at that point. So we talk them through that during the live session, and then we also hand out, we link them to an app guide which has specific things in there. So I think from our point of view and from our experience, thankfully, the things that have come up have been the things we've experienced before or we thought could come up.
Fair enough. Okay, so assuming I'm setting up my immersive lab for the first time, I don't really know very much. What would be the sort of best practice guidelines that you would give to me of how to go about it?
I can come in here as well. So the first thing I would say is don't try and train too many people at once. So for example, in a high school setting, don't try and do, say, a whole year group at one time. Start smaller, which I've already mentioned earlier on. And then if there's a bigger group, for example, when you do take it to, say, a class of 30, have somebody else on hand as well. So if you have a teaching assistant who can also be on hand to help people with the setup. So even things like how to use the controllers on a headset, for example. So it's not just about how to use that particular software, it's about how to use the headset in general. So, I mean, one of the things that sometimes still surprises me is that sometimes people will have a headset on and you'll tell them all, look to your left, look to your right, and they'll just move their eyes within the headset. So even things like making sure people know they have to move their head and their neck, it's not just their eyes. Oh, thank you for the clap, Sam. So that would be one of the things I would say is to, don't try and do too much at once. So be patient with yourself. Don't expect yourself to know everything straight away. Everybody is learning together when it comes to new technologies. And then I would say the second one in terms of best practices is to also consider the hygiene of immersive labs as well. So obviously hygiene and cleanliness has always been super important, but especially over the last year, we've had a lot of people asking us best practices for cleaning headsets between people using them. So there's a technology called CleanBox, and that can be used to clean headsets, and it doesn't require any wipes or anything. They use UVC, I think it's called, to clean the headsets. And there's a few other things you can do in terms of maintaining high hygiene levels in the lab. But again, just even in terms of budget, accounting for things like that as well.
Yeah, obviously hygiene's a very important subject, especially when dealing with headsets and shared devices anyway. But certainly, as you say, during times of pandemic when people were more wary about potentially sharing devices.
Yeah, exactly.
Jonathan, do you have anything to add in terms of best practice guidelines for setting up and running a lab?
Yeah, well, just on the note about hygiene, yeah, I've had my share of having to strip down paddings and straps and putting them in my washing machine, and then rehooking them up later. Yes, definitely hygiene is one of the issues, especially we also work in a medical environment. So we have to ensure, obviously, that our users and any participants in our research actually is guaranteed that it's a safe usage of the devices. But I have to once again talk about the content perspective, I think, from a lab. Of course, there will be processes and procedures put in place for all the technology. But what's going to be important is before we jump into which technology to identify what are the goals and what are the learning outcomes from the content perspective. Once you have a very clear view of that, then we can actually go into a sandbox and identify what are the best tools to put together. So we should actually look at labs I think as Sam mentioned, there should be places where you can actually experiment. And I think too many labs go in with certain already fixed views of whether they are in the VR sector or they are in the AR sector. I think we have to be a little bit more open-minded and really let the content needs drive what the technology solutions are going to be.
Great. And Usama, do you have anything to add to that in terms of the best practices?
So the thing is, when it comes to Honism XR, is we want to make all of things easier for everyone. It's not about it's not about like we're gonna eliminate, let's say, the creators, but actually we're gonna make the things easier, much easier for everyone. It's all about like how can we take the technology to its fullest potential with less timing? Because I've seen, like, I have friends who, like, they have to block themselves and not go out for at least a week or 2 weeks just to make like some small content for VR. And I see them struggle a lot. And yeah, I think it's about the technology can do a lot of things, but it depends on how much pressure we have to put on it, let's say.
Right. Okay. I'm going to add a couple of, I think, maybe more practical points and operations points. I mean, the Oculus, the Pico, and the Vive all support their own mobile device management systems now, so you can support devices at scale. But then there's simple things as well, just like thinking of space and how much space you need in layout. Things like having chairs and tables on wheels so you can move things around to reconfigure it depending upon which devices you're going to be using. And yeah, I think not having mirrors, not having reflected surfaces, and making it that sort of welcoming space to explore, but obviously still with the academic learning focus. Would you agree with those?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
Sorry.
go on.
Yeah, I think Sam's yeah, you're right about the point that there has to be a lot of flexibility. No, not one project is going to be identical to another, and I think having that flexibility of things moving around, being able to be reconfigured, whether it's going to be 2 sets on this project or 20 sets in another project, it has to have that level of flexibility so that we can be able to explore and try out the technologies in new areas.
Yeah, I agree with both the points you guys have just made. I thought Sam's point about the layout was a really, really good point, and actually a really obvious point from my point of view as well, that to consider that layout. And then that also made me think, just in terms of when people have a headset on their face, sometimes people can feel quite vulnerable with that. So another consideration would be about making people feel safe trying out this new technology. So part of that links with the layout and other people not entering, say, the area that they are in. So say you lay out a square of where somebody is in their VR headset, is making sure other people don't walk through that, because depending on what headset you use, sometimes people can't see beyond the headset. And then quite a big one is also to have people's permission before you take any pictures of them with the headset on. So I know that especially when people first start using VR and somebody has a headset on, people like to take pictures of them because this is this really cool thing. But actually, to be very conscious that some people feel very vulnerable in a virtual reality headset, and you should still stick by things you would do even if they weren't in the headset. So you wouldn't randomly take a picture of your colleague, or in a student situation, another student, without them knowing. So just being conscious of that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, we use the technology every day, so we get used to it, and it doesn't seem like anything. But Sophie's right. There are a lot of new users who come on, and the first time they use it, they're actually scared. So you really have to actually take note of that and realize that there is some discomfort. And once a person has a bad experience in VR, they never want to go back in again. So we have to try to actually make all the first experiences good experiences, and then you have somebody who will love the technology for the long run.
Yeah, exactly. And also some people feel quite self-conscious putting something on their face. So it's about minimizing any discomfort. Obviously not everybody will feel that, but there will be some people who might do.
Yeah, and I think as well, on the space side of things, making sure it is a safe space. It's not just a case of people walking through, but it may be there's a group of people who know each other and are friendly, like mucking around. Then there's a chance that they might think it's funny to shove their mate who's in VR because they can't see them. And yeah, for me, that's like that's the fastest way to get thrown out of my lab is if you push somebody who's in VR because they can't see you and you think it's funny to sort of scare them or whatever. Okay, great. Moving on then, just conscious of time, let's start looking at train the trainer. What does that even mean?
So
I know what it means, but
yeah, Jonathan, you go.
Okay. Well, I'm in the I teach in the university, and obviously we have a lot of colleagues, and I've been spending probably the last 2.5 years trying to preach the use of AR and VR in the university, and I must say that there was a lot of fear. 50% of the people were not really convinced of the users of the technology in education. Then you have, of course, 50% who are believers, but there's always this question mark, on whether it's something that's really going to be something in the long run, or is it just a novelty? Obvious, but after the COVID-19, I think that changed a lot of the views of people, and really after 2020, I started to actually get a lot of phone calls of people interested to find out more. But as you start to talk to them, and these are all educators, you realize that they hear about the technology, they understand what it could possibly do, they've experienced it, and many of them have experienced it, unfortunately, on a cardboard. So it's not really a very good experience. But they've all been tasked to come up with something in VR, but they don't really understand what it is. Is it something that's really AR? Is it something that they can use in a classroom environment, or is it something a student can do at home? So they still need to understand what are the abilities. And I find myself spending a lot of time explaining it. But once you do, then they start to come up with good ideas on how to implement the technology, and how to incorporate the content into the tech.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, Jonathan. I think, yeah, what I was going to say also links with that in terms of guiding them through how the VR will fit into their teaching. So they might, obviously, if it's a needs-based use anyway, they will know, but just in terms of if they're running a classroom session, how do you integrate the VR into that session? How do you manage 20 people on a headset at once, and those kinds of things?
Yeah, and if I may add, some people find this thing extremely intimidating. So also, especially like people who are of a certain age, they might not seem to be accepting of the idea anymore, and maybe trying to train the trainers that are a bit younger, let's say, and who will be able to take this technology further because they are tech savvy enough, let's say.
All right. But we're looking at people who are likely to be running the labs, or facilitating training. What are sort of beyond just running the content? What are some of the other sort of aspects that we need to be training around?
So I don't know if this is different to in terms of running the content, But I would also say in terms of using the device and then using the software features as well. So just starting from basics really of how to put the headset on, how to adjust the headset so it's comfortable and sitting on someone's face correctly, the controllers that they use, and then how they navigate to whatever software app that you want them to navigate to as well. And just having a sound knowledge of how both of those things run. So from a vendor perspective, we would train the trainer in that respect so that they know how to do all of those things, and we can also send them over videos and written guidelines as well, so that they can always revert back to any session that we have covered with them too.
And is that materials that you've got that are sort of generic or bespoke across devices, or sort of just for VR or particular courses, or do you have to do a lot of work for each client or each new trainer?
So because most of what we do is off-the-shelf training, for example, our public speaking course is our most popular one. So we will have videos showing in-app footage across Quest, Pico, HTC Vive, so that it looks exactly how it would look to the instructor of the immersive lab, so that it's as similar as possible to them, so that it does feel like we are still walking them through it, even if it's a pre-recorded video.
Right.
Along with the physical lab, there needs to also be relevant training courses. I think that have to be incorporated into the programs in the institution. But what we find is there are actually two different verticals of when it comes to immersive VR training. You have obviously the 3D graphics and the Unity platform side of things, but you also have the cinematic VR, where it's more suitable for photographers, videographers. So you actually have two different verticals, and you have to have training in both areas, and you have to have the expertise in both areas, because I guess both areas do cater for different types of content.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's, you've made it hard for yourselves by covering all aspects as possible. But as you say, it's great to have all those areas covered. Sema, have you been doing any sort of trainer and as part of your prototyping and build up of your MVP of your creation platform?
So yeah, we've been asking, let's say, teachers, early stage teachers, elementary school teachers, what are the problems. We've introduced them first to the technology because some of them had no idea what AR or VR is. And since we are basing our technology with AR, so we talk to them through AR, and then we showed them few stuff. It was kind of a focus group, and we came up with few solutions for our UX design. Actually, it was more about the UX and what would they need so they can create content and they will have it used by their students. And they came up with a few ideas, and they said, yeah, this could be actually an extension to the course material we have, so we don't have to center the course within AR, and AR is going to be a better explanation of a certain thing. And also we chosen science and maths and physics, but this, when it comes to these kind of things, we didn't choose anything else yet. We just focused on math and physics.
Right. Okay. And do you think it's necessary to like go super in depth, like the intricacies of how AR and VR work and where they came from and all their history, or do you think that's just like additional information? If they're interested, you can help them, point them in the right direction of where to find that out, or is it like driving a car? You know, you know enough to get from A to B, but you don't have to be a mechanic to keep it operational. or do you think it's good to have that sort of level of depth sort of
I think it is
around
important.
the technical aspects?
Yeah, I think it is important because there are a few cases, like really back in the history of AR and VR, that they used the technology and they have nothing of today. Like today, it's more or less easier comparing to, let's say, 2001, and having like a book that is interactive and it is tagged and everything. So we showed them, okay, they tried it, but back then they didn't have the technology. It was not easy, yada yada yada. And then today, it's things are much easier with a click, with a drag, a drop. You what kind of animation you want to have for this kind of thing, or let's say, where do you want the course to go? How do you want the information to be? How do you want your student to interact with the information you're giving them? So you would be more of a pedagogy kind of situation happening that will exceed what traditional materials are now doing.
Right. In your lab, Jonathan, how deep do you go? Do you go into like the full sort of explaining accelerometers and gyroscopes, 3 DOFs and 6 DOFs, talking about Battle of Borodino and the Sword of Damocles, or you just keep it high level in terms of here's the basics of 360 degrees and stereophonic capture?
We always do spend a little bit of time on the history. I think we want to just show the world that, or at least our students, that VR has a long history. It's been around, for 200 years in some sort of physical or some sort of device. And it's not something that's very new. It's just that the technologies today, and I think as someone mentioned, it's really here now where things are accessible and easy for us. We don't have to be rocket scientists to put something together. You've got great authoring systems now that you don't have to be a programmer. As long as you are a content developer, there are tools that can help you to get things going. It was always a price point, I think, and how ready the technology is. I'm a true believer that the technology is here and it's now and it's affordable. And now that it's probably here to stay. We've seen it over 200 years come and go in different formats. But I think, especially in the education and training space, I think that's where we're going to see a lot of growth. And that's how we are, telling it to our students, and we believe that we can actually build some very good training content and here to stay in terms of technology.
Sure. Do you think there's a need for virtual training content for training a trainer?
Training a trainer in a virtual environment.
Yeah.
Well, I guess ideally we have to practice what we preach. I guess, if it would be wonderful to actually have tools and create tools in the virtual environment, because I think we are talking about immersion and learning in the immersive space. What better way to teach about VR than to learn it through experience? And I think that's a matter of then now creating the content to be able to deliver that experience.
Sophie, you've probably dealt more with trainers in the enterprise space. Do you think there's anything sort of different there in between education and enterprise in terms of training a trainer?
That's a good question. In all honesty, I must admit that when we do trainer sessions, ours are much more focused on the practical side of things, and frequently ask questions that learners might ask of them. So we don't actually tend to dive into the history of VR. So it's interesting that you've both said that. Maybe we should. So ours is a lot more focused on the practicalities of it, which perhaps is also easier because we provide off-the-shelf solutions predominantly as well. So yeah, the difference between enterprise and education, that is a good question. I think, I mean, the main difference would certainly be in terms of budget. It seems a lot more difficult in the education sector to secure budget for a new technology, or, I mean, at this stage, if it's new, it is taking a risk if somebody hasn't done it before, whereas enterprise seem a bit more open to taking that risk. But otherwise, I would say there's probably not that much of a difference from my experience.
Okay. And beyond the trainers, who else should we be training? Given, if we had all the time in the world and it didn't cost us time and money.
So I would say definitely train multiple people. So don't rely on a single point of contact, because if that person leaves, then who's going to help everybody then? So to have a team of people that know what they're doing, that you've trained to understand the hardware, software, setup, all of that. And then that can also trickle down to other team members, other departments, other teams in general. So yeah, I would say who else we be training? Multiple trainers, and then they can trickle down that knowledge to other departments and the students themselves as well.
I think we need to find champions of the technology. Very often we see a lot of educators come in and where we try to enable them with the skill sets. A lot of them are just looking at it as extra work. So we have to find, I believe, champions in each school or in each institution, people who really actually believe in it. And it's not so much about knowing the technology or knowing how to create things. It's believing that you can use it as a tool that's going to make a difference. And once you have somebody like that who can champion the cause, then they're going to be able to bring it down to all the levels, the creators, the content specialists, the students, the faculty. Then you'll be able to build that ecosystem, of using the technology. And I think that's how we can take it really to the next level.
Right. So those champions, they become your evangelists and specialists and enthusiasts and build up that interest amongst a wider group of people. So you have that knowledge sharing and spreading. So you, as Sophie says, you're not relying upon that one person.
Exactly, correct.
People want to learn about it as opposed to feel like it's something that they have to do.
Yes, because I think once you get to the point of believing in it and realizing that it can make a difference. I mean, some of the content we work with the elderly as therapy, and when you actually bring it out there and you put it into place and you see the difference it makes and how it actually improves the quality of life of certain people, then you start to believe in it. You start to say, hey, this is not just a newfangled technology or novelty. It is actually something that can make a difference in people's lives. And I think when you get to that point of belief, then anything is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think being able to witness the potential impact that VR and AR to a certain degree can have on people in terms of a positive outcome, it's hard not to want to show other people that once you've experienced that endorphin rush of people enjoying it or genuinely, feeling that their lives have been bettered by it. Okay, to wrap up quickly then, we've got some useful resources to share with the audience in terms of where they can go in terms of finding out about training a trainer and setting up immersive labs, companies, blogs, guides, etc.
Well, this may be a bit biased given that we are representing the AIXR, but the Education Training Advisory Group, and I think the Enterprise Group as well, are definitely working on, if not already published, some white papers that have some direction on this kind of thing. So that's definitely one place to look.
Yes, thank you for the plug. I completely forgot to mention that I am chair of the enterprise group, and yes, we are working on white papers about how to deploy immersive technologies within your organization. And I know the education and training group are doing the same around adoption and immersive labs. Jonathan, where do you point people, or do you have your own internal materials?
Yeah, I mean, in our area, we have our own materials, but I'm also going to put a plug in for the AIXR education group materials that are coming out. That, in fact, there is a whole chapter on the history of VR, and but there's a lot more information as well. I think to take away some of the fear, I think that newbies may have in coming into this space, and I think it's because there isn't that much information out there in the open, in the public domain, that AIXR is coming up with these materials that we think will be able to help, both educators and businesses to understand the technology and how to incorporate the technology in their work.
And Usama, where would you recommend people go?
Actually, well, people can look online, that's for sure. But yeah, we are like at AIXR, we are really working on a big project, and once it's finalized and once it's out in the open, it's gonna be a one hell of a guide to a lot of people, actually.
Excellent. And I think hardware manufacturers have been doing a better job of providing guides in terms of how to use the hardware. But you generally have to get in and be a ISV, independent software vendor partner with them to get access to a lot of the white papers, or a lot of them are very developer orientated. So yeah, a good centralized location of information for resources would be good. I do have a number of blog posts if you want to look me up. So we have a couple of minutes left. Are there any quick questions from the audience about anything that we've covered or not covered? Otherwise, it's time to grab a coffee virtually before the second part of the panel.
Oh, there was some typing in the chat pod, but now it seems to be coming
No,
back and
it's still
forth,
typing.
Sam. They're like, I'm still typing. Yeah,
Thank you. You're welcome.
very
Has it
good.
been of interest to you?
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm actually going to wrap our event, so you can keep typing in the chat pod if you like, but I'm going to wrap us so that we can begin for the next event. This main event has finished. We're going to stick around for just a few minutes as we convert over and prepare for another panel, so stay right with us, but this live stream will now close. Thank you again to our videographers, Tony Cube Studios, and the YouTube audience, which we've heard has been enjoying the presentation from Great Britain.